Before I take you into the darkest, most twisted mystery I have ever had the privilege of telling you, I need you to do one thing for me. If you are the kind of person who cannot sleep at night because your brain keeps spinning with questions about unsolved disappearances, about secrets buried so deep that even time itself cannot dig them up, about the terrifying possibility that the people we mourn might actually be breathing somewhere we never thought to look, then I need you to hit that subscribe button right now and smash the like on this video. It costs you nothing, but it tells me that you want more stories like this, stories that grab you by the throat and refuse to let go until the very last word has been spoken. Now settle in, because what I am about to tell you will make you question everything you believe about love, about survival, about the monstrous things people do to protect their secrets, and about the extraordinary lengths two terrified young people will go to when the only choices presented to them are disappearance or death. In the autumn of 1992, when the maple trees in the Pacific Northwest were turning shades of amber and crimson, two young people who had been married for less than 3 weeks drove into the Cascade Mountains of Oregon for their honeymoon camping trip. Their names were Vanessa and Kyle Hartwell. She was 24 years old, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight like polished copper, delicate features that made strangers turn and look twice, and a laugh that her mother described as sounding like wind chimes in a summer breeze. He was 26, dark-haired, with sharp cheekbones and intense eyes that seemed to see through the surface of things, the kind of eyes that made you feel like he was reading a book written on the inside of your skull. They were young, they were in love, they had their entire lives stretched out before them like an unwritten novel, and they were driving into the mountains to spend a few days beneath the stars, beside a river, wrapped in each other's arms while the world fell away. They never came back. When search teams finally reached their campsite at a place called Whispering Pines, nestled deep in the forest where the river ran cold and violent with snowmelt from higher elevations, they found a scene that told a story of terrible, sudden tragedy. The tent was still standing, its entrance flap hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. A camping stove sat beside a log where someone had clearly been preparing dinner. A pot contained the congealed remains of what appeared to be chilly, cold, and untouched. 2 camping chairs faced the river, positioned as if their occupants had simply stood up and walked away, except they had not walked away. They had vanished, completely, irrevocably, as if the earth had opened its mouth and swallowed them whole. Downstream along the riverbank, personal items were scattered like breadcrumbs left by a cruel fairy tale. A woman's hiking boot wedged between 2 rocks, still laced, still holding the ghost shape of a foot. A waterlogged backpack containing clothing that had been soaked through. A camera with ruined film still inside, its lens cracked, its secrets dissolved by water. Everything pointed to one devastating conclusion. They had been walking along the riverbank, perhaps hand in hand, perhaps laughing about something trivial, and the treacherous current had taken them, swept them under, dragged them into the freezing depths where the water churned white and merciless over submerged logs and jagged stones. For 2 weeks, search and rescue teams combed every accessible stretch of riverbank. Divers checked the deeper pools where bodies might lodge. Cadaver dogs walked the trails with their noses pressed to the earth. Helicopters swept the canopy from above. Nothing, not a shred of clothing, not a bone, not a single physical trace of Vanessa or Kyle Hartwell was ever recovered. The official conclusion, reached with heavy hearts and downcast eyes, was that the bodies had likely become trapped beneath submerged timber or had been carried far enough downstream to enter the Columbia River system, where they could have ended up anywhere, including the Pacific Ocean. The case was ruled a tragic double drowning. The search was suspended. The families were told to grieve. A memorial service was held 6 weeks after the disappearance. Vanessa's mother, Patricia Cooper, collapsed in the arms of her husband, her screams echoing off the walls of the small church where her daughter had stood in a white dress just weeks earlier, radiant with the particular joy of young women who believe the future belongs to them. Kyle's father, Richard Hartwell, stood rigid and silent, his jaw clenched so tight that the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. Detective Marcus Webb, who had led the investigation, attended the service in his dress uniform, watching 2 sets of parents bury children who existed in that horrible limbo between missing and confirmed dead. He had been forced to tell Patricia Cooper that after 2 weeks with no contact, no sightings, and temperatures dropping into the 30s at night, survival was statistically impossible. He had believed it then. The evidence supported it. Everything made sense in a tragic, terrible way. For 32 years, that was the story. 2 young lovers, taken by a river, mourned by their families, remembered in photographs that slowly yellowed with age. The case file gathered dust in a drawer. The insurance claims were processed. The world moved on, and Marcus Webb carried the weight of their disappearance as one of the few unresolved failures in an otherwise distinguished career, a splinter lodged beneath his skin that he could never quite extract. But 32 years later, on an unseasonably cool Tuesday morning in late September 2024, in the desert city of Phoenix, Arizona, a cardboard box marked with the word "free" in black marker sat on the driveway of a modest house at 2847 Saguaro Lane. The house had belonged to a woman named Dolores Kemp, age 73, who had died of heart failure with no immediate family to claim her belongings. An estate sale had been organized to liquidate what remained of her life, and the usual crowd of bargain hunters and antique collectors had gathered to pick through the remnants of a stranger's existence. Margaret Chin stopped at the driveway because she collected vintage cameras. She was a paralegal for a law firm that specialized in insurance fraud, and she had a peculiar hobby of hunting down old photographic equipment at estate sales and garage sales. In the box, beneath a tangle of old cables and faded instruction manuals, she spotted a battered Polaroid one-step camera from the 1990s. She reached for it, and as she lifted it free, a photograph slipped out from between the camera's cracked leather carrying case and the bottom of the box. It fluttered down like a leaf detached from a branch, landing face up on the concrete driveway. Margaret almost missed it entirely. She was already examining the camera's shutter mechanism, already calculating what she might pay for it, when her peripheral vision caught the image on the ground. She bent down and picked it up, and then her hand froze in midair. The photograph showed a couple seated at an outdoor cafe. Palm trees swayed in the background, their fronds catching bright sunshine that washed out the colors to that distinctive faded quality of old instant film. The man had dark hair graying at the temples, a lean face with prominent cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to look past the camera rather than at it, as if he were watching something on the horizon that no one else could see. The woman beside him had auburn hair pulled back in a loose braid, delicate features that time had softened but not erased, and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. They both wore casual clothing. He had on a simple button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows. She wore a sundress with thin straps, the kind of dress you wear when the air smells like salt and bougainvillea. They looked comfortable together, settled, the way couples look after many years of sharing a life. What caught Margaret's attention was not the subjects themselves, though something about their faces tugged at a memory she could not immediately place. What stopped her cold was the handwriting on the white border beneath the image. Someone had written in blue ink, in a casual, unhurried hand, V and K, Playa del Carmen, April 2007. Margaret Chen had a memory for faces. It was occupational. Working in insurance fraud meant studying photographs of claimants, cross-referencing images, looking for the telltale signs of deception. Over the years, her firm had researched hundreds of cases, and certain faces had lodged themselves in her memory like thorns. The Hartwell disappearance had been one of those cases, a double life insurance payout that the company had contested for years before finally settling with the families. She remembered because the case file had included wedding photos of the missing couple, images of two young people radiating happiness just weeks before they supposedly drowned in a mountain river. The resemblance was striking, unsettling, the kind of resemblance that makes your stomach drop because your brain is trying to reject what your eyes are telling you. Margaret purchased the camera for $5, taking the photograph with it. That evening, seated at her kitchen table with her laptop open and a glass of wine untouched beside her, she searched for the old news articles she half remembered. It took less than 20 minutes to find them. Newlyweds presumed dead after Cascade River tragedy. Search for missing couple yields no bodies. Hartwell family offers $50,000 reward for information. The wedding photo loaded on her screen. Vanessa Hartwell, née Cooper, 24 years old, auburn hair, delicate features, standing on the steps of a small church with confetti caught mid-fall around her shoulders. Kyle Hartwell, 26, dark hair, prominent cheekbones, intense eyes, his arm around her waist, his smile wide and unguarded. The similarities to the couple in the Polaroid made Margaret's hand tremble slightly as she reached for her phone. By midnight, she had called the tip line for the Oregon State Police. By morning, the photograph was on its way to the cold case unit in Portland. By the end of the week, it had landed on the desk of Marcus Webb. Marcus had retired 3 years earlier. He was 62 years old, living in a modest ranch-style house on the outskirts of Portland, where the walls of his home office were lined with filing cabinets containing copies of case files accumulated over 30 years with the Oregon State Police. Each folder represented a piece of someone's tragedy that he had tried, and sometimes failed, to resolve. The Hartwell file sat in the bottom drawer of the cabinet closest to the window. He had always kept his unresolved cases within reach, as if proximity might somehow inspire a breakthrough that eluded him during waking hours. When Marcus opened the evidence envelope and saw the photograph, he felt something shift in his chest. Not quite recognition, not quite disbelief, something in between. A sensation like vertigo, as if the ground beneath his understanding of the past had suddenly revealed itself to be nothing more than a thin sheet of ice over dark water. He had attended their memorial service. He had watched Vanessa's mother collapse in grief. He had delivered the news to Kyle's father that the search had been suspended. For 32 years, he had carried their faces in the back of his mind. Two young people frozen forever at 24 and 26. Forever young, forever lost. And now this, a photograph dated 15 years after they supposedly died, showing them alive, sitting in a cafe in Mexico, looking older, yes, changed, yes, but unmistakably, impossibly, undeniably them. Marcus set the photograph on his desk and stared at it for a long time. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the documents spread before him. His mind, trained by decades of investigation, began the process he knew too well, cataloging details, forming questions, constructing theories. If this was really them, if they had somehow survived and chosen to disappear, then everything he thought he knew about that September weekend in 1992 was a lie. More disturbing still was the handwriting on the photograph. Those initials, V and K, written casually, as if the person holding the camera knew exactly who these people were and saw no reason to hide it. As if their survival were not a secret but a simple fact, recorded for posterity in blue ink on instant film. He retrieved a magnifying glass from his desk drawer and held it over the Polaroid, studying every pixel of the faded image. Behind the couple, barely visible in the sun-washed background, was a sign he had not noticed at first. He adjusted the glass, squinting. The sign read Playa Paraíso Beach Club, Mexico. He opened his laptop and began to type. His phone rang the next morning. The caller ID showed a Portland number he recognized. Sarah Vance, the detective who had taken over several of his cold cases when he retired. She was 42, sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her no-nonsense demeanor. Marcus had mentored her early in her career, and she had become the finest investigator he knew. "Marcus, it's Sarah. I need to talk to you about the Hartwell case." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "The photograph. You've seen it." "I'm looking at it right now," Sarah said. "Tell me I'm not losing my mind." "You're not losing your mind," Marcus replied, his voice quiet and steady. "But I think we might need to reopen a case we all thought was closed." He hung up and turned back to the photograph. His mind was already racing ahead, constructing frameworks, identifying the questions that needed answers. If Vanessa and Kyle Hartwell survived, was the campsite staged? Who benefits from their disappearance? Life insurance payouts. How much? To whom? Why surface in a photograph 15 years later? Carelessness or intention? Who took the photo? Who owned the camera? And most crucially, who was Dolores Kemp? And what was her connection to two people who supposedly drowned in an Oregon river in 1992? The Portland Police Bureau's cold case unit occupied a corner of the third floor in the Justice Center building downtown. The space always smelled faintly of old paper and the bitter coffee that sustained its small team of detectives. Marcus arrived at 9:45 the next morning, signing in at the visitor's desk and receiving a temporary badge that felt strange after years of carrying permanent credentials. Sarah met him at the elevator, and beside her stood a younger detective Marcus did not recognize. James Park, early 30s, eager and sharp-eyed, the kind of young investigator who reminded Marcus of himself 3 decades ago. In the conference room, Sarah spread documents across the table and laid out what they had established. A timeline took shape on the whiteboard. September 19th, 1992. Kyle and Vanessa Hartwell reported missing from Whispering Pines campground. Search conducted. No bodies recovered. Memorial service held October 31st, 1992. Life insurance claims filed November 1992. Paid out in April 1993 after the required waiting period for missing persons presumed dead. April 2007. The photograph surfaces, allegedly taken in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, 15 years after their disappearance. June 2007. Wire transfers begin to Dolores Kemp in Phoenix, continuing for over 12 years. 2 policies, Detective Park explained, pulling up files on his tablet. Vanessa had a policy for $100,000 with her parents as beneficiaries. Kyle had a policy for $250,000. Beneficiary was his father, Richard Hartwell. Both policies were relatively new, purchased about 6 months before the wedding. But here's what's unusual. 3 weeks before their honeymoon trip, Kyle increased his policy from $100,000 to $250,000. The insurance company questioned it during the claims process but ultimately paid out. They noted in their file that Richard Hartwell was extremely persistent in pursuing the claim. Marcus made a note in his leather journal. Did we ever establish what their financial situation was like before they disappeared? Both had student loans, Park continued. Kyle had just started a job as a software engineer at a startup in Seattle. Salary around $64,000. Vanessa was working as a graphic designer at a small firm in Portland, making about $32,000. They had about $8,000 in combined savings and were renting an apartment in Portland's Hawthorne district. Pretty typical young professional couple. Not desperate for money, but not wealthy either. Marcus leaned back in his chair. What about their families? Any financial issues that might have motivated helping the kids fake their deaths? Sarah shook her head. Vanessa's parents were comfortable but not rich. Kyle's father, Richard Hartwell, was successful but also had significant debts related to real estate developments. In 1992, he was overextended on a commercial property deal that was failing. The insurance payout actually arrived at a convenient time for him. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Marcus pulled the Polaroid from its evidence sleeve and placed it beside the wedding photo from the case file. The wedding photo showed 2 young people on the steps of a church, confetti in the air, their faces radiant with the particular joy of those who believe the future belongs to them. The Polaroid showed older versions of the same faces, or faces so similar that denying the resemblance required willful blindness. The specific curve of Vanessa's jaw, the distinctive spacing of Kyle's eyes, the way they sat together, comfortable in each other's presence, the unconscious body language of a long-term couple. I think it's them, Marcus said finally, or someone who looks remarkably similar. But Sarah, even if this photograph is legitimate, it doesn't prove they faked their deaths. It's possible they somehow survived the river and, for reasons we don't understand, chose not to come forward for 32 years. Park sounded skeptical. Without ever contacting their families? That seems unlikely. I know, Marcus agreed, but we need to investigate all possibilities. People don't just abandon their entire lives without powerful motivation. If they're alive, something made them desperate enough to disappear completely. Sarah pulled up another document. I've been looking into the camping trip itself. Did you know they changed their plans at the last minute? Originally, according to Vanessa's mother, they were supposed to go to the coast, Cannon Beach. Vanessa had made reservations at a bed and breakfast. But 3 days before they left, they canceled the reservation and decided to go camping in the Cascades instead. Vanessa told her mother they wanted something more adventurous. Did we investigate that at the time? Marcus asked. Briefly. It was in the file as background information. Young couples change plans all the time. But Marcus, what if they changed plans because they needed to be somewhere remote? Somewhere a disappearance would be believable? The implication settled over the room like a heavy blanket. If the Hartwells had deliberately chosen an isolated campsite near a dangerous river, it suggested premeditation. It suggested the entire tragedy had been calculated, planned, executed with cold precision while 2 sets of parents waited at home for a phone call that would shatter their worlds. There was one peculiar aspect of the original investigation that had never been fully explained, Marcus recalled. A witness, a fellow camper at a site 3 miles downstream, had reported seeing a dark blue van parked on a service road near the river on the night the Hartwells allegedly disappeared. The van had been there for only about 20 minutes and had left traveling away from the campground. At the time, Marcus had investigated whether it might have been someone dumping trash or a couple seeking privacy, but he had never identified the vehicle or its occupants. Now, he wondered if that van had been an escape route. Marcus spent the next several hours reviewing the original case file in his home office, making notes about details that might take on new significance. The tent had been zipped shut when rangers found it. The camping stove had been turned off. Small details that had seemed like routine caution at the time. Perhaps they had left the camp for a walk before cleaning up dinner. But now Marcus found himself questioning whether someone staging a scene would remember such details. Would someone planning to vanish forever think to turn off the stove? To zip the tent closed? Or would those small domestic gestures be the unconscious habits of people who, even in the act of erasing their own existence, could not quite abandon the rituals of normalcy? His phone rang that evening. A Phoenix area code. Officer Linda Morales from the Phoenix Police Department, following up on the Dolores Kemp inquiry. Miss Kemp lived alone, Morales reported. No children, never married. She worked as a nurse at Phoenix General Hospital until her retirement in 2015. Pretty unremarkable life. But there was something interesting in her financial records. She received regular wire transfers, monthly deposits of $1,500 going back to June 2007. The transfers came from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. They stopped in December 2019. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Did you trace the source? We tried. The account was closed in 2019 and the bank isn't being cooperative without a warrant. But Detective Webb, those transfers total over $200,000 over 12 years. That's a lot of money for a retired nurse with no obvious wealthy relatives or connections. Marcus wrote down the dates. June 2007, just 2 months after the date on the Polaroid photograph. The connection was not subtle. It was a neon sign flashing in the darkness. Officer Morales, I need you to send me everything you have on Dolores Kemp. Employment history, addresses, any travel records you can access. This woman might be connected to a 32-year-old missing persons case. An officer, be discreet. If there are people connected to this who think they've gotten away with something for 3 decades, I don't want to spook them. The following afternoon, Marcus and Sarah sat in the living room of Patricia Cooper's modest craftsman-style bungalow in southeast Portland. The house was a time capsule. Photographs of Vanessa at various ages covered every surface, from baby pictures to her wedding day. A portrait of Vanessa in her wedding dress hung prominently over the fireplace, her smile eternally youthful and full of hope. In the corner of the yard, visible through the window, a small memorial garden occupied a patch of earth. A stone bench surrounded by roses, with a bronze plaque that read, "In loving memory of Vanessa Marie Cooper Hartwell, 1968 to 1992. Patricia was 78 now. Her hair was completely white, her face lined with the particular kind of weariness that grief carves into a person over decades. But her eyes were sharp and clear, and recognition flashed across her features when she saw Marcus on her doorstep. Detective Webb, she said softly, I wondered if I'd ever see you again. They settled in the living room. Patricia folded her hands in her lap and waited with the patience of someone who had spent years waiting for news that never came. Marcus pulled out the Polaroid photograph and placed it on the coffee table between them. A photograph was discovered recently at an estate sale in Phoenix, Arizona, Sarah said gently. We need you to look at it and tell us what you see. Patricia leaned forward, reaching for reading glasses on the side table. She picked up the photograph and studied it for a long moment. Marcus watched her face carefully, looking for any sign of recognition, shock, or deception. What he saw instead was confusion giving way to something that looked almost like physical pain. This woman, Patricia said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. She looks like my Vanessa, older, but the resemblance is remarkable. Her eyes found Marcus. Who is she? We don't know for certain, Sarah replied. But the photograph is labeled with initials V and K, dated April 2007, taken in Mexico. Mrs. Cooper, is there any possibility at all, that Vanessa could have survived that night at the river? Patricia set the photograph down with trembling hands. Vanessa is dead, detective. I've known that in my bones for 32 years. If she were alive, she would never have let me suffer this way. Never. Marcus asked her to think back to the months before the camping trip. Was there anything unusual? Any changes in Vanessa's behavior? Any conversations that seemed strange in hindsight? Patricia was silent for a long time. When she spoke again, Her voice had changed, become more uncertain. There was something. I didn't think about it much at the time, but Vanessa and Kyle had a terrible fight about 2 weeks before the wedding. I was visiting to help with wedding preparations, and they thought I was in the garden. Kyle was saying something about his father, about not wanting to be like him, about refusing to be trapped. Vanessa was crying. She said something like, "There has to be another way. We can't just run away from this." I didn't understand what she meant, and when I came back inside, they both acted as if nothing had happened. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Did you ever ask Vanessa about it?" I tried. She said they were just stressed about the wedding, about money, about starting their life together. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Patricia's voice cracked slightly. What mother suspects her daughter is lying about something like that? There was more. About a week before they left for the camping trip, Vanessa had come to visit her mother alone. She seemed agitated, kept looking out the window as if she expected someone to arrive. She asked Patricia if she would still love her if she did something Patricia didn't understand, something that might hurt her but was necessary. "What did you tell her?" Marcus asked. "I told her I would always love her no matter what." I thought she was talking about moving to Seattle with Kyle, leaving Portland. I never imagined. Patricia's composure finally broke, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Oh God, what if she's been alive all this time? What if my daughter has been out there somewhere and I've been mourning a ghost?" Then Patricia noticed something in the photograph that changed everything. She asked for the magnifying glass and held it over the woman's wrist. "Vanessa had a bracelet exactly like this," she said, her voice shaking. "A silver chain with a small dove charm. Her grandmother gave it to her when she was 16. She wore it constantly, even slept in it. She was wearing it at her wedding." Patricia's hand trembled as she set down the glass. "This is my daughter. I don't know how. I don't know why. But that's Vanessa." The certainty in her voice sent a chill through Marcus. He had wanted verification, but now that he had it, the implications were staggering. A mother had identified her daughter in a photograph taken 15 years after her supposed death. They were no longer investigating a possible misidentification. They were investigating a deliberate deception that had lasted more than 3 decades. The next morning, Marcus drove north to Seattle. Richard Hartwell's office occupied the top floor of a sleek glass building in downtown Seattle with views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. Hartwell was 81 now, but carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who refused to acknowledge the limitations of age. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his suit custom-tailored, his entire bearing radiating the kind of wealth accumulated over decades of ruthless business decisions. "Detective Webb," Hartwell said without turning from the window. "I was told you retired 3 years ago." "I did, but I'm consulting on a case that's been reopened. The Hartwell case." It wasn't a question. Hartwell finally turned, and Marcus saw a face that had aged hard. Deep lines around the mouth and eyes, a certain brittleness in the expression. Marcus placed the Polaroid on the desk. Hartwell glanced at it, then looked away with what appeared to be dismissive disinterest. But Marcus had interrogated enough people to recognize the tell. The slight tension in Hartwell's jaw. The way his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the armrest of his chair. "I don't see the relevance of a photograph of strangers," Hartwell said. "Look at it more carefully. The initials, the date, the resemblance to your son and daughter-in-law." Hartwell picked up the photograph with obvious reluctance. He studied it longer this time. What Marcus saw was harder to interpret. Not shock, not grief, something that looked almost like weariness. The exhaustion of a man who had been carrying a weight for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. People have doppelgangers, detective. The world is full of faces that resemble other faces. My son died in 1992. I buried him, or at least the memory of him, decades ago. I don't appreciate you dredging up that pain with speculation based on a photograph that proves nothing. The woman is wearing a bracelet that Vanessa never took off. Her mother identified it immediately. Jewelry can be replaced. Marcus leaned forward. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm going to be direct with you. We have evidence suggesting that Kyle and Vanessa may have faked their deaths. If that's true, it means they committed fraud, cost insurance companies hundreds of thousands of dollars, and caused immeasurable grief to their families. I need to know if you had any knowledge of or involvement in such a plan." For a long moment, Hartwell simply stared at Marcus with eyes that revealed nothing. Then he stood and walked back to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "Kyle hated me," Hartwell said finally. "Did you know that, detective?" My own son looked at me with contempt from the time he was old enough to understand what I did for a living. He thought I was ruthless, immoral, that I valued money over people. He swore he would never be like me. People often rebel against their parents in youth, Marcus observed. This wasn't rebellion. This was fundamental disagreement about how to live in the world. Kyle wanted to be good. He wanted to help people, to make the world better through technology and innovation. He was naive, idealistic, soft in ways that I knew would get him hurt. Hartwell's voice took on a distant quality, as if speaking more to himself than to Marcus. When Kyle told him he was marrying Vanessa, Hartwell had offered to set him up in a position at his company. Good salary, benefits, a clear path to partnership. Kyle turned him down, said he'd rather struggle on his own than compromise his principles. It was infuriating, Hartwell said. Here I was offering him everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed to create, and he threw it back in my face. We had a terrible argument 3 months before his wedding. I told him that pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. He told me that some things were more important than money. Marcus asked if Kyle had ever come to him asking for help. Hartwell returned to his desk and sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 81 years. 6 weeks before the camping trip, Kyle called me. It was late at night, around 11. He sounded desperate. He said he'd made a terrible mistake and needed my advice. I told him to come to Seattle, that we could talk in person, but he refused. He wanted to discuss it over the phone. What was the mistake? He wouldn't say specifically, but he told me he'd gotten involved in something at work, something he thought was wrong, but didn't know how to get out of. He said if he went to the authorities, it would destroy innocent people. But if he stayed silent, he'd be complicit in something he found morally reprehensible. Did he give you any details? No. I pressed him, but he was paranoid about saying too much on the phone. He kept saying the walls had ears, that people were watching him. I thought he was being melodramatic. Hartwell's expression darkened. I told him he was being foolish, that whatever he discovered, he should either report it or keep his head down and move on. I told him that martyring himself for principle was the kind of naive thinking that would ruin his life. What was his response? He hung up on me. That was the last conversation I ever had with my son. Hartwell's voice had gone quiet. 2 weeks later, I received the call that he and Vanessa had disappeared. I've spent 32 years wondering if I could have said something different that night. If I could have convinced him to confide in me fully. Marcus asked about the insurance money. Hartwell's eyes flashed with anger. Are you suggesting I had something to do with my son's death? That I would murder my own child for insurance money?
I'm establishing facts.
You had financial motivation, and you were the last person Kyle called before he disappeared. I received that insurance money, detective, and it made me sick. Every dollar felt like blood money, a price tag on my failure as a father. I donated the entire amount to a scholarship fund for engineering students. You can verify that if you doubt me. Marcus made a note to do exactly that. If Kyle and Vanessa are alive, if they staged their deaths, where do you think they would go? Hartwell was silent for a long time. Kyle always talked about Costa Rica. He and Vanessa had this dream of living somewhere simple, somewhere they could disconnect from what he called the machine of modern capitalism. They wanted to build a life that mattered, that wasn't defined by accumulation and status. It was naive, childish thinking, but it was genuine. As Marcus turned to leave, Hartwell spoke again. Detective Webb, if you find them, if they're really alive, tell Kyle that I'm sorry. Tell him I should have listened better that night. Tell him that he was right and I was wrong about what matters. Marcus nodded and left the office, carrying with him the image of a powerful man diminished by decades of regret. In the elevator, his phone rang. Sarah Vance. Marcus, I've got something. I've been digging into Kyle's employment history, looking at the startup he worked for in Seattle. What did you find? The company was called TerraSoft Solutions. They developed environmental monitoring software for government contracts. The company went bankrupt in December 1992, just 3 months after Kyle disappeared. That's interesting timing. It gets better. I found a news article from January 1993 about a federal investigation into TerraSoft. The FBI was looking into allegations that the company had falsified data in reports to the EPA about chemical contamination levels at several Superfund sites. The investigation eventually fizzled out because key witnesses refused to cooperate and evidence had been destroyed. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place with the force of a slamming door. Kyle discovered the data falsification. He knew that if the truth came out, it could lead to criminal charges, destroy the company, cost dozens of people their jobs. But if he stayed silent, contaminated sites wouldn't be properly cleaned up, potentially endangering thousands of people. Exactly. And Marcus, there's more. The CEO of TerraSoft was a man named Gerald Kemp, Dolores Kemp's brother. The connection they had been searching for finally revealed itself, stark and terrible. Dolores Kemp had not been a random helper. She had been protecting her brother's company. And she had done it by helping two young people disappear before they could testify or provide evidence to federal investigators. Marcus moved up his flight to Phoenix. He needed to be there immediately. Officer Morales had arranged a conference room at the Northeast Precinct, and she was waiting with several boxes of files and a laptop displaying financial records. She was in her early 30s, efficient and thorough, the kind of officer Marcus had always appreciated working with. Dolores Kemp was born in 1951 in Tacoma, Washington. Morales began. One sibling, Gerald, born in 1949. Their parents died in a car accident in 1970, leaving both kids some insurance money. Dolores used hers to go to nursing school. Gerald used his to start his first business venture, medical waste disposal. The business did well for about 5 years, then went bankrupt in 1976 amid allegations of improper disposal practices. Gerald managed to avoid criminal charges, but the business was dissolved and he disappeared from Washington state records for about 8 years. And Dolores? She became a registered nurse in 1974, worked at various hospitals in Washington until 1987 when she relocated to Phoenix. That's when she started at Phoenix General, first in the morgue, then later in maternity. She lived modestly, never married, no close friends. Attended a Catholic church regularly but wasn't involved in any social groups. The morgue. Marcus felt ice water run through his veins. A nurse with experience handling the dead. Receiving mysterious payments from offshore accounts. In possession of a photograph of two people who supposedly drowned. From 1995 until her death, Morales continued, Dolores made regular calls to a number registered to Gerald Kemp. Monthly calls, always lasting between 20 and 40 minutes. Gerald's locations changed over the years. Seattle in the 90s, then Portland, then briefly back to Seattle. His last known address was a condo in Bellingham, Washington. But when we contacted the building management, they said Gerald Kemp moved out in December 2019 and didn't leave a forwarding address. December 2019. The same month, the wire transfers to Dolores had stopped. There was more. A neighbor, the same Margaret Chun who found the photograph, reported seeing a man visiting Dolores about a week before she died. Elderly, white-haired, arrived in a rental car. He stayed for several hours. When he left, Dolores seemed upset. Raised voices could be heard through the wall. Then Morales opened a file box and pulled out a folder marked with evidence tags. This was found in Dolores Kemp's home office, hidden in a false bottom drawer of her desk. The estate sale company almost missed it. Inside the folder were newspaper clippings, all yellowed with age, all related to the Hartwell disappearance. And beneath the clippings were photographs, dozens of them spanning years. Marcus spread them across the conference table, his hands trembling slightly as he recognized Vanessa and Kyle Hartwell aging across the images. A beach sunset, a marketplace crowded with vendors, a small house with tropical plants in the yard. Inside what appeared to be a modest restaurant. In every image, they looked different from their 1992 selves. Older, obviously, but also altered in subtler ways. Different hairstyles, different fashion choices, the kind of deliberate changes people make when trying to blend into a new environment. They were organized chronologically in an album, Morales said. The earliest ones look like they're from the mid-90s. The most recent appears to be from around 2015. Marcus examined the most recent photograph. It showed Vanessa and Kyle seated on a terrace overlooking what appeared to be a colonial town square. White buildings with red tile roofs visible in the background. Vanessa's hair was shorter and darker than in the earlier images, streaked with gray. Kyle wore glasses he hadn't needed in his youth. They looked comfortable, settled, like people who had found their place in the world. Dolores was tracking them, Marcus said quietly. For 23 years, she kept tabs on where they were, what they looked like. This wasn't just about helping them disappear and forgetting about them. She maintained contact. Some of the photographs had notes on the back. Dates, locations. One said San Miguel de Allende, November 2015. A colonial town in Mexico's Central Highlands, popular with American and Canadian expatriates. Exactly the kind of place where two Americans with false identities could blend in comfortably. But it was the letters that shattered Marcus completely. Stored in a separate box, tied with string, organized by year. He untied the first bundle and began reading, his coffee growing cold beside him. The earliest letter was dated March 1993, written in neat handwriting on plain paper with no return address.
Dear D.
We are settling in, though the transition has been harder than we anticipated. V struggles with the isolation, with knowing that everyone we loved believes we are dead. I remind her that we had no choice, that what we discovered left us no safe alternative. Your brother made his position clear. Cooperate or face consequences we could not survive. The money you sent arrived safely. We are living simply as we must, but we are alive and together. That will have to be enough. Please destroy this letter after reading as we discussed. The less evidence that exists of our connection, the safer we all remain. K. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Gerald Kemp had threatened them. The decision to disappear had not been entirely voluntary. It had been coerced. Kyle and Vanessa had discovered something dangerous enough that Gerald felt his only option was to eliminate them. Not through murder, through erasure. The subsequent letters painted a picture of two people trying to build a life in exile. Learning Spanish, finding work teaching English, the small joys and large sorrows of living in permanent hiding. Vanessa's homesickness bled through every mention of her mother. Kyle's guilt manifested in repeated justifications for their choice. A letter from 2001 mentioned a close call. Someone who had known them in their previous life had visited their town, and they had spent 2 weeks hiding until the person left. And then in 2015, a letter that changed tone entirely.
Dear D.
Your brother contacted us directly last month. After 23 years of silence, he found us. I don't know how, but he knows where we are. He says the statute of limitations has expired on the crimes we witnessed. That we are safe now. That we could potentially return if we wished. V and I have discussed this endlessly. The truth is we have built a life here. We have friends, work we find meaningful, a peace we never had in our old existence. But your brother frightens me, D. He is not offering us freedom. He is reminding us that he still has power over our lives. He mentioned that the insurance payouts could be contested, that fraud charges could be filed, that our families could learn the truth in the most painful way possible. We have decided to stay where we are. But I wanted you to know that your brother's reach is longer than we hoped, and his mercy is not to be trusted. K. The final letter was dated September 2019. Dear D, V has been ill. Nothing serious, the doctors say, but it has forced us to confront our mortality in ways we have avoided for too long. We are in our 50s now, no longer the young couple who fled in terror. Your brother visited again last month. He is not well. I could see it in his movements, hear it in his breathing. He spoke of settling accounts, of ensuring that the truth remains buried with those who know it. He frightens me still, even in his diminished state. I write to tell you that we have made arrangements. If anything happens to us, if we should die or disappear again, there is a package held by a lawyer in Mexico City containing the full account of what happened in 1992. The lawyer has instructions to send it to certain parties, including Detective Marcus Webb, if we fail to check in annually. We do not do this to hurt anyone, but to ensure that if we are silenced, the truth will still emerge. Gerald needs to know that his leverage over us has limits. This will be my last letter to you, D. You have been kind to us over the years, kinder than we deserved perhaps, and we are grateful. But the time has come to step back from even this tenuous connection to our past. Please take care of yourself. Please know that despite everything, we remember our families with love. V and K. Marcus set the letter down. A dead man's switch. The Hartwells had created insurance against being silenced. held by a lawyer in Mexico City with instructions to release everything if they failed to check in. He called Sarah Vance immediately. "Sarah, I need you to find out everything about what happened at TerraSoft after it collapsed. Specifically, whether Gerald Kemp faced any ongoing legal issues, civil suits, anything that might motivate him to keep the Hartwells under his thumb decades later. And I need to get to Mexico City." Now, the flight departed at 11 that night. Marcus did not sleep. He reviewed his notes, constructing and deconstructing theories. Gerald Kemp had operated TerraSoft in Seattle, developing environmental monitoring software for government contracts. Kyle Hartwell, a young software engineer with idealistic notions about using technology for good, had discovered that the company was falsifying contamination data. Superfund sites that should have been flagged for extensive cleanup were being certified as safe, potentially exposing communities to dangerous levels of toxic chemicals. Kyle had confided in his father, who had told him to either report it or keep quiet. But before Kyle could decide, Gerald had discovered the leak. The threats must have been explicit and terrifying. Cooperate in your own disappearance or face consequences that would destroy not just Kyle, but Vanessa and possibly their families. Dolores Kemp, Gerald's sister, had the expertise to help them. A nurse who worked in a morgue would know how to make a disappearance convincing, would understand the systems and procedures that could be exploited. She had traveled to Oregon in September 1992, likely bringing supplies or assistance that helped stage the campsite scene. The Hartwells had fled to Mexico with false identification that Dolores or Gerald had provided. They had lived quietly for decades, teaching English, integrating into the expatriate community, always aware that one wrong move could bring their past crashing back. The plane landed in Mexico City at 4 in the morning. Marcus was met by Special Agent David Torres from the FBI's legal attaché office. Torres arranged cooperation from Mexican authorities and put Marcus in contact with a retired federal officer named Rafael Mendoza who knew the expatriate community in San Miguel de Allende. The drive to San Miguel took 3 hours through changing landscapes, from urban sprawl into mountains and valleys of central Mexico. Dawn broke as they climbed into higher elevations, the sun illuminating a countryside of agave fields and small villages. They reached the town mid-morning. Colonial architecture painted in vibrant colors. Narrow cobblestone streets. Church spires rising against a bright blue sky. Mendoza met them at a cafe overlooking the central square. He studied the photographs Marcus showed him, pulling out reading glasses to examine them more closely. Marcus saw recognition flicker across his face. "You know them," Marcus said. It was not a question. "Perhaps. There is a couple who run a small art gallery on Calle Alameda. The woman, Elena, teaches English at the library on Tuesday evenings. The man, Martin, does computer repair work. They have been here many years, keep to themselves but are well-liked. They look something like these photographs, allowing for age. Can you take us there? The gallery doesn't open until noon, but I can show you where they live. They have a house on the hillside above the town center. After that, what you do is your decision." They walked through narrow streets, climbing gradually until the colonial center gave way to quieter residential areas. Mendoza stopped in front of a modest house painted ochre yellow with a small garden of succulents and a terrace overlooking the town. "This is it. I have seen them many times working in their garden, walking to town. They are quiet people, kind people. I hope whatever you want with them is Justice isn't always kind," Marcus replied, "but it's necessary." Torres and Mendoza stayed back as Marcus approached the house. A wrought iron gate led to a small courtyard with potted plants and a stone fountain. Marcus took a deep breath and knocked on the wooden door. For a long moment, there was no response. Then he heard footsteps, and the door opened to reveal a woman in her mid-50s with dark hair streaked with gray, delicate features, and eyes that Marcus recognized instantly from dozens of photographs spanning decades. Vanessa Hartwell stood in the doorway, very much alive. The expression that crossed her face when she saw Marcus was one of recognition and resignation, as if she had been waiting 32 years for this moment. "Detective Webb," she said quietly, "I wondered if it would be you." Behind her, a man appeared, older, gray-haired with glasses perched on his nose, but unmistakably Kyle Hartwell. "I think," Vanessa continued, "you should come inside. It's time we told you everything." Marcus stepped across the threshold. The home was filled with the accumulated evidence of lives lived in exile. Photographs lined the walls, not of the past they had fled but of the life they had built. Friends, students, moments of joy captured in a place they had made their own. They settled in a living room filled with books and art. Vanessa made coffee with trembling hands while Kyle sat across from Marcus, his expression a mixture of fear and relief. "How did you find us?" Kyle asked. "A photograph.
Playa del Carmen, 2007.
Found at an estate sale in Phoenix. Dolores Kemp's estate." Vanessa's hands stilled on the coffee pot. "Dolores is dead? 6 months ago. Heart failure. She kept your letters, your photographs, everything that led me here." Kyle closed his eyes. "We asked her to destroy them. Every letter. We begged her to burn them after reading. But Dolores was sentimental. She couldn't let go. Your families think you're dead," Marcus said. "Your mother, Vanessa, has spent 32 years in mourning. She has a memorial garden for you." Tears streamed down Vanessa's face. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I haven't lived with that guilt every single day? Then why put them through that?" Kyle stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a folder. "Because her brother gave us a choice, detective. Disappear or die." And we believed him. Inside the folder were documents. Photocopies of files from Terasoft Solutions showing contamination data that had been altered. Reports that had been falsified. Correspondence between Gerald Kemp and government officials suggesting bribery and corruption. Evidence of crimes that would have sent Gerald to prison for years. "I found these files by accident," Kyle explained. "I was doing routine maintenance on the company servers and discovered a hidden directory. When I realized what I was looking at, I copied everything. I thought I was being careful, but Gerald had monitoring software I didn't know about. He knew within hours that I had accessed the files." Vanessa sat beside her husband, taking his hand. "Gerald came to our apartment 3 days before the wedding. He told Kyle that if the files ever surfaced, he would make sure Kyle was implicated as the one who had done the falsification. He would ruin Kyle's career, have him arrested, destroy any credibility he had. But that wasn't the worst threat. He threatened you," Marcus said to Vanessa. "He said accidents happen to young brides, drunk drivers, home invasions, tragic deaths that police never quite solve. He was very specific about what could happen to me, to Kyle's father, to my parents. He made it clear that everyone we loved would pay if Kyle didn't cooperate." Kyle's voice had gone hollow. "He gave us the camping trip as our opportunity. He said Dolores would meet us there, that she would help us disappear, and that if we cooperated, our families would stay safe. If we refused, or if we ever tried to come back, everyone we loved would suffer. So we went," Vanessa continued. "We staged the campsite to look like we'd been swept away by the river. Dolores helped us. She brought supplies, a van, money. She drove us to California, got us across the border into Mexico. We've been here ever since." The evidence Kyle had copied was with their lawyer in Mexico City. If they failed to check in by December 1st each year, the lawyer was instructed to send copies to the FBI, the EPA, and the media along with a full written account. Their insurance policy against Gerald trying to silence them permanently. Their last check-in had been December 1st, 2023. They had until December 1st, 2024. 9 weeks. But Marcus had worse news. Gerald had visited Dolores shortly before she died. The wire transfers had stopped in December 2019. "I think he's tying up loose ends. And I think you two are on his list." The fear that crossed their faces was genuine and immediate. They had been careful for 32 years. No real names. No connection to their old lives. But they had left a trail. Their lawyer. Their annual check-ins. A pattern that a determined investigator could follow. That night, Marcus received a call from Sarah Vance. Her voice was tight with urgency. "Marcus, we found evidence of where Gerald has been. Credit card records show purchases in Mexico City 3 days ago. Gas station, grocery store, pharmacy. He's there. He's in the same city as you." Marcus felt adrenaline spike through his exhaustion. "Have you alerted Agent Torres?" "Already done. And Marcus, there's more. We got the autopsy review on Dolores Kemp. The medical examiner found trace amounts of digoxin in her system. It's a heart medication, but at the levels they detected, it could have been used to induce a fatal arrhythmia. If administered carefully, it would look exactly like natural heart failure. Gerald killed his own sister. It looks that way. She was the last person who could definitively connect him to the Hartwell's disappearance. With her gone and the paper trail destroyed, he probably thought he was safe. But then the photograph surfaced. Marcus thought rapidly. He knows we're looking into the case. It's been in the news. If he's been monitoring for any sign that his past is catching up to him, he'd have seen it. Sarah, he's not here just to tie up loose ends. He's here to eliminate Kyle and Vanessa before they can testify. Then you need to get them out of Mexico City now. Don't wait for tomorrow's flight. Marcus contacted Torres, who arrived within 30 minutes. They moved Kyle and Vanessa to a hotel near the airport. As they prepared to leave, Marcus noticed Kyle staring at his laptop screen, his face drained of color. What is it? Kyle turned the laptop toward Marcus. On the screen was an email that had just arrived from an anonymous address. After 32 years, did you really think you could stop running? Mexico City is beautiful this time of year. I especially enjoy the view from the Condesa neighborhood. So many Americans come and go from that FBI safe house on Calle Amsterdam. See you soon, John. They had been found. Torres reacted instantly, pulling his weapon. We need to evacuate now. He knows this location. They moved quickly through the parking garage. Torres and 2 other agents forming a protective circle around Kyle and Vanessa. Marcus stayed close, his hand resting on the service weapon he had been authorized to carry. The garage was dim and quiet, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. They were 20 feet from the waiting SUVs when a figure stepped out from behind a pillar. Gerald Kemp looked nothing like his driver's license photo from 2018. He had aged dramatically, become gaunt and hollow-cheeked, his skin carrying the grayish pallor of serious illness. But his eyes were bright with a feverish intensity, and the gun in his hand was steady. Hello, Kyle. Vanessa. It's been a long time. Torres and his agents had their weapons drawn immediately. Mr. Kemp put down the weapon. You're surrounded by federal agents. There's no way this ends well for you. Gerald's laugh was harsh and bitter. Nothing has ended well for me since Kyle here decided to be a hero. My company destroyed. My reputation ruined. Decades of looking over my shoulder. And now, when I'm dying anyway, he gestured to his emaciated frame. I find out that 2 people I thought I'd successfully buried are still alive and ready to talk. Gerald, please, Vanessa said, her voice shaking. We've kept silent for 32 years. We'll keep the secret. Just let us go. The secret is already out. A retired detective finds a photograph, and suddenly the whole house of cards starts falling. Dolores is dead. Did you know that? My own sister. And I had to kill her because she kept your letters, kept your photographs, couldn't let go of the sentimental connection she had to you. Marcus spoke carefully, keeping his voice calm. Gerald, you're ill. Lung cancer, if I had to guess from your appearance. You've got maybe months left. Do you really want to spend them in prison? Prison? I'll be dead before any trial concludes. At least this way, I ensure that the truth dies with me. His finger tightened on the trigger, the gun aimed directly at Kyle. The shot that rang out did not come from Gerald's gun. Agent Torres had fired, his training and reflexes faster than the dying man's intent. Gerald Kemp collapsed to the concrete, the gun clattering away from his hand. Torres and the other agents moved immediately to secure the weapon. Marcus pulled Kyle and Vanessa back, shielding them from the sight of their tormentor bleeding on the garage floor. He's alive, Torres called out. Shoulder wound. We need medical immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Gerald Kemp was stabilized and taken into custody, conscious enough to curse Kyle and Vanessa as he was loaded into the ambulance, still insisting that they had ruined his life by refusing to be complicit in his crimes. 6 months after Kyle and Vanessa Hartwell returned from the dead, Marcus Webb stood in Patricia Cooper's garden, watching mother and daughter embrace. The memorial bench with Vanessa's name had been removed, replaced with rose bushes that Patricia tended daily, telling anyone who asked that they represented rebirth and second chances. The legal proceedings had been complex but more merciful than Marcus had expected. The district attorney, after reviewing the full scope of Gerald Kemp's threats and the evidence of corporate fraud, had declined to prosecute the Hartwells for insurance fraud. The insurance companies agreed to settle for repayment. Kyle and Vanessa pleaded guilty to filing false documents related to their false identities, receiving suspended sentences and probation. The judge stated from the bench that sometimes the law had to acknowledge that people facing impossible choices should not be punished for choosing survival. Gerald Kemp lived just long enough to be formally charged with the murder of Dolores Kemp, attempted murder of Kyle and Vanessa, corporate fraud, and a dozen other crimes spanning 4 decades. He died in a prison hospital 3 months after his arrest. The evidence Kyle had preserved triggered a massive reinvestigation of dozens of Superfund sites. Early findings suggested that at least 3 communities had been exposed to dangerous toxins because of Gerald's fraud. Kyle's reunion with his father had been complicated. Richard Hartwell had been hospitalized for stress-related heart problems when he learned his son was alive. When they finally met, their conversation lasted 6 hours. They were still working on their relationship, still learning to communicate without the weight of old resentments. But they were trying. Marcus watched Vanessa help her mother prune a rose bush. Their conversation too quiet for him to hear but punctuated by occasional laughter. The reunion had been difficult. Patricia had collapsed when she first saw Vanessa, cycling through shock, joy, anger, and grief in the space of minutes. But in the weeks and months that followed, they had begun the slow process of rebuilding a relationship severed by 3 decades of absence. Sarah Vance joined Marcus in the garden, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "How are you feeling about all this?" she asked. Conflicted, Marcus admitted, "I spent 32 years believing I'd failed to solve a case. Turns out there was no case to solve. Just 2 scared kids who made the best choice they could under terrible circumstances. I should feel vindicated, but mostly I just feel sad for all the years they lost." "They're getting some of those years back now," Sarah observed. Marcus nodded. He thought about calling Sarah to discuss which cold case they should tackle next. But instead he drove home in silence, letting the weight of the past 6 months settle into memory alongside all the other cases that had shaped his career. Some mysteries, he had learned, didn't have neat solutions. Some ended with more questions than answers, more complexity than closure. But the Hartwells were alive. Their families were healing. And Gerald Kemp's crimes would never harm anyone again. In the end, Marcus thought that was a kind of victory. Not perfect, not simple, but real. And sometimes, in the messy business of seeking truth and justice, real was the best you could hope for. There is one final detail that Marcus learned only weeks after the case concluded. Officer Morales in Phoenix, handling the final disposition of Dolores Kemp's estate, found one last item in a safety deposit box. A handwritten letter dated October 2024, just weeks before Dolores' death, addressed to V and K. "My dearest V and K, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I hope my passing was gentle. I write this knowing that the photograph I carelessly kept may have set in motion the very events I tried to prevent. Gerald visited me recently, and I saw in his eyes that he is planning something terrible. He is dying, and dying men often seek to take their secrets to the grave, even if it means taking other people with them. I have left instructions with my estate attorney to ensure that certain evidence reaches Detective Marcus Webb, the man who first investigated your disappearance. He struck me as thorough and fair when I researched him years ago, and I believe he will handle the truth with the care it deserves. You made choices under impossible circumstances. You survived when Gerald wanted you erased. You built lives worth living despite the grief you caused others. That takes a strength I admire, even as I acknowledge the pain your survival has inflicted on those who loved you. My greatest regret is that I helped Gerald control you for so long. I told myself I was helping you stay safe, but the truth is I was complicit in his cruelty. I hope that in my death I can give you something I couldn't give you in life. Freedom from fear. Go home. Tell your truth. Face the consequences with courage and trust that love is stronger than the lies we tell to survive it. With affection and remorse, Dolores." Marcus read the letter twice, feeling a deep sadness for a woman who had spent decades trapped between loyalty to her brother and compassion for the young couple he had terrorized. In the end, she had chosen to help them, even if it meant betraying Gerald from beyond the grave. She could not undo what she had helped him do, but she could ensure that the truth survived even if she did not. And so the story ends, not with a neat bow, not with perfect justice, but with 2 people who had been dead for 32 years finally allowed to be alive. With a mother who had mourned a ghost finally able to hold her daughter's hand. With a father who had carried regret like a stone in his chest finally able to set it down. and with a retired detective who had carried a failure for 3 decades finally able to close the file, not because the case was solved in the traditional sense, but because the truth, however painful, however complicated, had finally emerged from the darkness where it had been buried. If the story shattered something inside you, if it made you look at the people you love differently tonight, if it made you appreciate the simple, extraordinary miracle of being alive and known and found, then please share this video with someone who needs to feel that same electric jolt of recognition. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button. Leave a comment telling me what you would do if you discovered that someone you mourned was actually alive somewhere in the world. Would you forgive them? Would you demand answers? Would you simply hold them and refuse to let go? I want to know, and I will see you in the next story. Until then, hold your loved ones close. Tell them you love them, because the greatest horror in this story was not the river, or the threats, or the disappearance. It was the silence. 32 years of silence where there should have been words. 32 years of grief where there should have been truth. And if there is one lesson to carry away from this, it is this. The truth, no matter how painful, is always kinder than the lie. Always, even when it arrives 32 years too late. Especially then.